Hello and welcome to the Essential Property Podcast with your hosts, Paul Samuda and Amanda Woodward. With 45 years of combined experience in the world of property buying, selling, investing and developing, they are here to share with you their knowledge in the Stoke-on-Trent, Newcastle-under-Lyme and Crewe property market. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Essential Property Podcast with your hosts Amanda Woodward and Paul Samuda. And today, as we're approaching the end of the year, we thought we would give you an update on what's been happening over the last couple of months, and primarily the completion of our Project OneB, as we used to call it, or now One Battison, which has finished its kind of 2-year renovation works, probably 3 and a bit years since we first viewed the property and agreed to buy it. So we're going to give an update on that as that is now complete, along with some of our thoughts of where we're at going into 2025, so we can start to plan ahead. And then lastly, we're going to catch up on our new digital podcasts, or a few digital episodes that we've released recently and what those are about and why we're doing them. So starting on One Battison, over to you, Paul, for an update on where we're at.
Oh, it's finished.
I know.
It's done. A labour of love. It's already starting to rent. I think one of the existing tenants was very keen to move into one of the small studios. I think if we look back, I think we can talk about what were the biggest challenges, how has it worked out overall in terms of our expectation, what lessons for other landlords in terms of what we went through, and if they have not necessarily a project this size, but just a new development, what sort of things they should be taking into account, which is probably different from normal HMO activities, and how we see performing going forward, I think.
And those that might be just listening into this episode for the first time, should we just do a quick recap on what we bought? So
That's a good idea.
if we rewind back to 2021, we viewed a property which was a pub with a HMO/hotel above, rooms above a pub, along with a function room. So we agreed to purchase that property subject to planning. It then took over a year for us to actually achieve planning with Stoke Council, which we spoke about in past episodes. So a year later, that got agreed. We then went into refurbishment, which was January 2023.
I think it didn't get agreed. It got painfully
Yes,
agreed.
well, we've said that in past episodes, haven't we? How
And I think
challenging.
you mentioned if there are any new users. Going in for a planning application is no joke whatsoever. One of our colleagues is in a battle right now on a development in Crewe. Our policy is always purchasing subject to planning, just because the planning process is so tough and difficult. It doesn't matter how straightforward, and we were told that this was going to be straightforward, and it was anything but. I think when we do a summing up for 2025, this is one of the things that I'm going to mention, because Andy Lorena, Deputy Prime Minister, and also head of Levelling Up, has been doing some things around planning. And I don't know whether it's, to be blunt, same crap, different packaging, or is it something that's going to be new? But the planning process is not something that can be taken for granted. For any development, any size, it's tough. You need a good team, you need determination, you need to be able to talk to planning, understand exactly what their expectations are. You know, over the years, and one of the things that we've learned from it, it's a little bit of give and take. If you stick by your gun to say this is what we want and we're not moving, you just won't get it through. I mean, that's the long and short of it. And even though it makes sense from your standpoint, and it's in the development plan for the city, if they say they don't want this size or they don't want this many rooms, often you've got to take it on the chin. So always put in a little bit of contingency.
Yeah. So that was over a year to get completed. Once we did get the green light, it was around about Christmas of 22. And with a plan that in January 2023, we would kick it off, which we did. We then opened the top 2 floors. So it's a 3-story building. We opened the top 2 floors, and that we renovated that within the space of probably about 9 or 10 months, and that all rented straight away, which we were really pleased about. Then we opened the rear part of the ground floor in 2024, again, rented straight away. And then we had the last few rooms finished last Friday.
That's right.
So we are complete.
Let me just rewind. I don't want our listeners to think that we just renovated and it was all walk in the park. I think you need to probably just remind them and draw out how important building regs are and inspection companies that we use. I mean, they brought in the fire service. It was a little bit of a controversial building because it was run as a pub before and they had issues in terms of fire. So they doubled down in terms of their requirements. And you got really quite creative in terms of this compartmentalizing criteria that they used. But there was issues around sound, insulation, then extra insulation. There was the compartmentalizing of the property as a just in case. And this is all on the back of Grenfell. We know that they're just belt and braces and then some. And I think once again, going forward, I don't think one can underestimate the need for strong fire risk assessment and taking that into account if you're introducing building regs. I think all lenders in terms of financing or refinancing want to see a building reg sign off. They want fire risk assessments. So that's non-negotiable now.
Yeah.
Non-negotiable. I don't know whether you've got anything to add onto that because you've dealt with building regs more often than not.
Yes, and they are upping their game, which means we have to up our game. I remember working with the particular building regs company that we're using for this development a few years ago. They would kind of pop in, sign it off, fairly quite straightforward. Obviously still meeting all the criteria, but now we have to provide particular updates. We have to sign certain waivers. We have to do something. I can't remember exactly what it's called. I'll put it in the show notes. I think it's called like a section 38 or something like that. And it basically just talks about the whole fire side of the building. Like Paul said, the fire service were consulted with. They had some comments. So we have certainly learned a lot. I mean, on something completely different, we arrived on site one day and it was basically raining in room 13, unlucky room 13. And we had to replace a whole flat roof, which we wasn't intending to replace. So a lot to learn, but we did it and came out fairly unscathed. So we're quite happy with that.
Well, speak for yourself. I'm not too sure whether I came away unscathed. One of the things that often people don't talk about is meeting budgets.
That's your side, isn't it? So that's why you.
Yeah. And this labor of love came in over budget and then some, because there was roof work that weren't expecting. There was groundwork that we weren't expecting. We had to make some changes as recommended by building regs and the fire service. And all it means is that when you go into a project, if you budget for a contingency of 10%, if it's a project where it's not straightforward, I would say up that to 15 or 20%, because once you're in, there's nothing you can do about it. If there's an extra bit of work that needs to be done as recommended, then you've got to do the work. If you don't have a contingency, that's a bit of a problem. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways, one of the unknowns when you go into development, small, medium, or large, is that there's stuff there that you can't sort of plan for. I mean, in the press recently, there's a whole load of stuff on HS2 and them building this whole bat nest for bats that actually don't exist but could exist in the area. I mean, and they've had to spend £100 million on that. I mean, obviously that's an extreme example, but it applies for different levels of development, small, medium, or large. And we knew this before, but obviously the larger development, the more the possibility of things can be introduced. I mean, one of the things we had to do is change all the sash windows, or the majority of sash windows. And the frames looked okay until we started to remove it, and they were rotten from before. That sort of added an extra £500 per window. So there's all a load of bits and pieces that have to be taken into account. And naturally, we're very pleased that it's now complete and we can move on and start to recoup. But that's only half the story. The most important is obviously being able to refinance and get our money out and get our investors' money out and get the valuation that we want, which again, we'll talk about our 2025 plans and how the market's looking in terms of interest rates, because I know our listeners are very keen in terms of our interest rates coming down, are they staying the same, and what's happening in that area.
I think looking at Battison from a rental perspective, we went into this development with a view that we wanted to create rooms in Stoke-on-Trent that didn't already exist. Rooms that were bigger than other HMOs on the market, rooms that were better designed, funkier, shall we say, slightly more modern, even better than those that we had created already on projects like London Road and Bethesda in the past, where we had brought kind of a unique design to the HMOs. We presented that in a location that wasn't traditionally HMO area, and we used the build it and they will come strategy. And fortunately, we built it and they did come, and they came quickly, and they came paying fantastic rents. And
just on that, is that something that we recommend that other people do, to go into an area that isn't notorious for high rentals and for HMOs, and on the basis of that, build it and they'll come?
No, I wouldn't. And I think we can only do that because of the level of experience, time spent in the area, and because we actually manage the properties ourselves, we have a greater feel for the market. So we knew when people were asking for bigger rooms, or are there any rooms at London Road with a bath? No, there's actually only one there. So we put in, 4 rooms at Battison with baths. So no, we wouldn't recommend it. And I think it's only when you have that kind of on the ground undercover intelligence that you can make those bold steps.
I don't know if you remember the then HMO officer, quote unquote. You do know that HMOs don't work around here.
Yeah.
The lackey to our main electrician said, "Great place, but HMOs don't work around here."
Yeah. And that's fine. They can keep thinking that. That's absolutely fine.
I think they're saying that from the standpoint of possibly people have tried and it hasn't worked. The reality is that in that particular area further down, there are some quite low quality HMOs at quite low prices. I think the takeaway, or what I would advise, if people are looking to do a development in an area where there are minimal HMOs, then my first response is that there are no HMOs there for a reason. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that if you think that you're not going to get arrows in your back and you are going to break the norm, then you need to have some strong conviction as to why that's the case. We had pretty strong conviction. It was a great building. It had great access to motorways. We knew that we could create almost like a destination HMO, and that's how it's become. People have been drawn to it. And I remember one tenant said, "I didn't want to be in Handley. I like this because it's a lot quieter around here." And so people have their own reasons why they've moved across. And there's parking. There's parking on premises.
Well, just on the point of parking, as we know, most HMO tenants, in our experience, don't drive and would like to live close to the train stations, bus stations, or where they work. But here we've created a property that allows you to park your car as well, nice and safely. And so we have attracted those HMO tenants who do drive, who do want to take care of their car and make sure that it's parked safely, and are happy to then maybe drive 10 or 15 minutes to work. There's no permits, the parking's free. And we've attracted a calibre of tenant that maybe we wouldn't attract on a road in the centre of town, with where there are sort of lack of parking and so on. So we did know that the parking would help us, and I don't think we realised as much as it would help us.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's lessons all around. Would we do another project like that again?
100%.
Yeah, I think our partners on there, our investing partners on there, because this is a joint venture, have been very supportive and are keen to do another one, although we haven't refinanced this one yet. So we're looking, aren't we? We're looking for another building in Stoke or Crewe or close to, or Newcastle for that matter.
And I think our criteria is kind of like, we like to go sort of 20-ish rooms. I'd like to go slightly bigger, but I think you think maybe 15, 20 rooms.
See what comes up. I mean, that's, if it works at that level, then why not? I think there are bigger HMOs in Stoke. I think there are 30 something.
Yeah.
I think it's in the 40-bed HMO somewhere. And that sounds a little bit too unwieldy.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's see what the future holds. Let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about 2025.
Okay.
I think you'd have to be living under a rock if you hadn't realized that things aren't going according to plan with the new government.
Mm.
I'm not going to say it's a shit show, but
It's a shit show.
it's a shit show. Now, on the brighter point, our friend Angela has put her best foot forward in terms of pushing for a whole bunch of things, that don't benefit landlords in the main. But one of the things that she seems to have got her teeth into is planning permissions, and she's waved through a bunch of developments that were stuck in planning or actually being declined, I believe, on appeal with planning, and she's waved that through on the basis that why wouldn't you do this development? So she's definitely stepping on a few toes, and I think good on her. It's a tricky balance with this government because obviously with their renters' rights bill, they're pro renters, but they want more housing. But everything that they're doing is pushing certainly landlords at our level to not invest or to sell in some cases. After the budget, and we did a pre and post budget digital podcast, which we'll talk about in a bit. We were unsure, but on the surface, the markets didn't like it, and they pushed long-term interest rates up, which was unfortunate because it's the long-term interest rates that determine fixed rates for mortgages. At this point in time, the economy hasn't grown, which doesn't surprise me, but it's been made worse by the budget. She's absolutely pummeled businesses. Businesses have cut back because of extra taxes on employment. And the markets have said interest rates aren't going to cut anytime soon. The shocking thing, and the last MPC meeting with the Bank of England, the vote was 6-3 in favor of maintaining interest rates at the level that they are. I think my belief, in my humble opinion, is once again, I think the Bank of England has taken a bit of a misstep. The whole world is dropping rates. Switzerland dropped by half a point. Canada dropped by half a point. The US dropped by 0.75% in the last 3 months. Europe has dropped by something like 0.75 in the last 3 months. And here we are in the UK, we've dropped by 0.25. And we've got the worst economy, and people are reeling as a result. So going into 2025, I think there has to be some concern. I mean, we've plowed a lot of money into One Battison, and we want to get that money out, but we don't want to get that money out at 7.5%.
No.
We want to get that money out to 4 point something percent or 5%. And that is looking uncomfortably a long way away because of the way the country's economy is going. It looks as if the country is going into recession. They don't want to talk about that. No government does, especially no new government does. But there's been nil growth in the last quarter, last few months. So I think if they go another quarter with no growth, that's technically a recession. And maybe that might push them to lower interest rates. But inflation is still there. They were talking about this stagflation, which the economist in me, the 2% economist in me, it's when the economy is stagnant and inflation is still growing. And that's the worst of all scenarios. That's something that any country wants to avoid at all costs. But it's difficult to get out of that situation. So I think for our landlords that are listening and planning, I think you've got to wait and see if you have fixed rates, coming undone as we have in the next 3, 6, 12 months. Then do you go for a tracker, or do you go for a high-ish fixed rate at the time? Honestly, I don't know. We've gone for a few trackers, so we've seen a few drops, but nothing like the amount that I expected. I expected that going into the end of the year, things would be 4.25, 4.5%. They're still 4.75. I thought end of Q1, they will be at 4%. It looks as if at end of Q1, we might see 4.5%. If we're very, very lucky, and I mean very, very lucky, 4.25%. But if I'm honest, I'm seeing no more than 4.5%. And while that's better than 5.25%, it doesn't give you the incentive to go and invest and remortgage as one should. In terms of rents are still going up. I think we've hit a bit of a ceiling on that. We've experienced that. In our last rent increase, there was some pushback. And I think there was some pushback. I think other landlords probably dropped their rents a little bit just to fill the rooms. And I think we got caught in the middle of that, if we're honest. So I think there's always going to be a ceiling on rents. People can't pay increased rents forever. And I always say, I'm paying extra £100 a month, but I've still got exactly the same room. I might get an extra £100 in value. Whilst it doesn't quite work like that, but that's what people would be thinking.
Yeah, we have steadily, I think I was saying on one of the last episodes that each time that costs have risen, we've increased rents to align with that to protect the landlords, to try to increase the rents enough to cover the increase in costs. And since COVID, we've done that on about 5 or 6 occasions to keep up with whether it be the inflation or the gas or the electric or the council tax or whatever's going on. I think you're right. I think we're probably there up at the ceiling now. So at least we are attracting the highest rents we think we can get for the time being.
And I think the one thing is that we've said to the team to be a little bit more flexible on the rentals, especially for new inquiries. There's no good having an empty room empty for 1 or 2 months because you're trying to get an extra £30 a month. So I think going into 2025, we're going to be a little bit more flexible in order to bring people in and keep them in there for 3, 6, 12 months and beyond, rather than have rooms empty. The occupancy was fine up until about November, end of October, November. And it starts to dip as people start to leave end of the year, which they normally do, but I think a few more people left.
Also, because with our a lot of our tenants being international, a lot will either not have work over the Christmas period, or for the holidays or the winter, they'll head back to another country and then come back in again in sort of February, March. So December, January, February, it was always just a little bit quieter anyway. So we'll do some deals, like you said, with tenants through to spring, and spring is where both our short stay and our long stay market really starts to pick up, and that's when we can maybe look at increasing the rents even again.
Yeah, we did an interesting exercise analysing a slightly larger property in terms of performance over the year, and see what the impact of working from home, higher energy costs, and other bits and pieces had on that particular property, which we'll present in our digital podcast. And that made quite interesting reading in terms of analysing that and how we can use it as a case study and use it as learnings for going forward in applying to our landlords. I mean, one of the takeaways, not to preempt the podcast, but as properties become older, I mean, a lot of our landlords arrived sort of post-COVID 2021. It's now entering its 4th year of it being an HMO, with more people working from home. It's taken a little bit more of a beating than it would do, and with that comes high maintenance costs, and that can be a bit of a challenge. Can be a little bit of a challenge.
We find that in the kitchens as well, not just in the rooms. The kitchens, when you've got people that are working at home, cooking 3 meals at home, where before they might just be coming home for dinner. There's breakfast, there's lunch, they're batch cooking. The washing machines are going twice as much. The ovens are being used twice as much. And in the moment, you don't realise it, but over the long term on the analysis, I guess you do start to see all those replacement appliances.
No, absolutely. So I don't think there's anything else. No, you have any thoughts on 2025? I think my overall is cautious. I mean, I'm normally cautious optimistic, but I think I'll probably move to cautious just because the government is still a little bit of an unknown quantity, and I just want to see a little bit more of what's happening. I read something today that they're investing about £1 billion into local councils to help them fight homelessness and evictions. What that actually means in terms of the private rented sector, I'm not sure. Whether fighting evictions means preventing people from being evicted, or unsnarling the problems in the courts, or whether it's just supporting the homeless sector. I'm not too sure. So the government is a little bit of an unknown quantity, and we want to actually sort of give another 6 months or so to see how things work out. Maybe if they have a bit of a spring review, then we'll get a better feel. So I think right now I'm cautious. I wouldn't be running into doing loads of brand new deals on the basis that I'm over optimistic. If it's part of the long-term plan, then yes, absolutely. But if it's speculative, I would say just be a little bit more cautious, I would say.
And we were talking about that at dinner last night in terms of when you do have a deal and the process that you need to follow before you pull the trigger and go for it. And that we don't speculate at all, really, do we? We look for quite a lot of certainty before we proceed. But what about those that are listening that are portfolio builders? They're looking to add one or two properties a year to their portfolio. What would the message be for them at this point, in your opinion, Paul?
I think a lot of it is linked to the cost of money. If there, and we have one landlord that makes a lot of money on his trading business and plows it into property. If that's a scenario where the cost of money is close to zero because you buy everything cash, then that's fine and you have a long-term plan. I mean, I'm always optimistic long-term on property. If you're looking to bridge and or use mortgage finance, then obviously the success of that development is linked to the cost of that money and being able to refinance at the right time at a reasonable rate. Because if you don't, that affects your cash flow. So I think I would say, nothing wrong with sort of an acquisition strategy, but I would have a number of what if scenarios. I would do some variances based on if interest rates are at 4.5%, 5%, 5.5%, 6%, for a 5-year fixed rate. How does that affect the cash flow? And the other thing, of course, is that rents will go up, but we assume it's going to go up by the rates that they're going up at the moment. Maybe you halve that and say an increase in rent by 5% a year rather than the 9 or 10% a year it's been going up in the last few years. So I think just pay back the numbers, be prudent, and see how that looks in terms of your cash flow, and then take it from there. There is a change in taxes. I saw an article today in terms of inheritance taxes is affecting people. Obviously, there's the whole stamp duty increase as well, an extra 2%. So there's lots of little costs that are affecting us going forward, which we need to include and budget for. But I would just say, just do the numbers, be cautious, put an extra little bit of contingency in, do your variance analysis to see, what's the worst case, what's the best case, what's the most likely case, so that you're not surprised by interest rates sticking at whatever it is for another 6 months, rather than anticipating 2 more drops.
That makes sense.
Okay. So we go talk about this digital podcast
Yes,
that we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yes, we should. Because we have released a few digital podcasts recently, but we haven't spoken about them. So share with our listeners, Paul, the thought behind it.
I think the thought was quite a simple one. We, as a business, are trying to introduce more tech into the business to make things easier for us, for the team. We like to communicate with our listeners and our landlords. We can't always and don't always have the time to do that like we are doing today. And some tech came about whereby we're able to do the research, collate the information, upload it, and that turns into a podcast, and we can do a few edits on subjects that we're interested in, that we think our audience will be interested in. And we can do that fairly frequently. So I think it's more frequency in terms of the podcast that we're doing. We can probably do a couple of 3 a month rather than 1 or 2 every 2 or 3 months. We've done a number of podcasts. I mean, we started this during COVID, if you remember, and we've continued it, but there's been sort of long gaps where we haven't done stuff. And I think this is where the digital podcasts come in. They may sound a little bit strange. They're a bit Americanized. And I think look beyond that and listen to the information. I would say to our listeners, we still intend to interview some other people. We've got one that we want to do on insurance and a couple of others on essay that we have planned for earlier in the new year. But these ones will bridge the gap where they can be a little bit more technical. I know we've done ones on budgets and renters bill and things like that. So I think it bridges the gap and it fills holes where we're not able to do the podcast because of lack of time.
Yeah. And it also allows us to be quite topical. So like you say, we did release them around the budget. Also, when the US presidential elections were on, we were trying to look at what's the outcome if we have a Trump win versus a non-Trump win, and we could then release that quite quickly. So those will be, like you say, a little bit more detailed and probably a little bit more topical to what's happening in the market.
And they can access, they're on our website. We never talk about our website, but there's quite a lot of information on our website, and that landlords might find useful. It's obviously wherever you get your podcasts from, you'll be able to access these in exactly the same way. We plan to up our game a little bit on the marketing side, both in terms of pulling in new business and just communicating more with newer existing landlords. So any new landlords that are interested in operating in our areas, which are now Stoke, Crewe, Newcastle, our core area, and now Birmingham, Burton and Derby, should definitely reach out to us and have a chat and see where we can assist, either in design, either in managing, or just advisory.
Sure. And I have been promising to do a whole podcast on the new areas, which we haven't got around to yet. But to kick off next year, there's been quite a lot of activity taking place in Birmingham and also in Burton, with a little bit in Derby. And our listeners don't know a great deal about that. So I'll be sharing what we're doing in those areas, what opportunities lie there, what we've been experiencing, and how you can work with us if you are in that Birmingham, Burton area. So I think that's it for today. We will put a podcast out also beginning of January as well, with a little bit more detail in terms of our 2025 plan, which we always do, and will help you to plan for your year ahead also. But until then, thank you for listening.
Okay, and to all our listeners, wish you a Merry Christmas if you celebrate that, and certainly a Happy New Year.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if so, please hit subscribe and share with those who you think would enjoy it too. To get in touch with Paul and Amanda directly, please visit their website www.essentialpropertyoptions.co.uk for more information. We look forward to sharing with you on the next episode.